President Trump is losing in a major way at the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. He is facing what is a blow to one of the strategies that I've told you about, that we've been documenting, how they want to, from the White House, get some of these cases up to the court. But this conservative-leaning Supreme Court is rejecting one of those bids. This is not the final act, but it is a huge, important, key step, and a step that Trump lost. He basically wanted the court to side with him in a bid to defund and go after these USAID contractors. The move comes just about 12 hours after key parts of the address. So I'm going to show you how this went, because some of what the president said last night was false, just simple lies. Some of it was hopeful, meaning things that he, like any president, might want to achieve, and trying to tell the nation about that. And then some of it was proven false, because the president made claims about things he's doing in this joint sort of congressional press address, right, to the pressing his case to the whole country as they watch. But he was basically bragging about things he says he has done, which by the next morning, the court said, no, you haven't.
Upon taking office, I imposed an immediate freeze on all federal hiring, a freeze on all new federal regulations, and a freeze on all foreign aid.
The Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's effort to freeze nearly $2 billion in foreign aid.
Yes, he tried the freeze. Yes, he said it. And by the next morning, that was the breaking news. The courts stopped it. And this is something that is a larger problem for Donald Trump for the reasons we've told you about, that he is deliberately, repeatedly going beyond precedent, the law, what courts have ruled in the past, and seeing if he can get away with it. And on this one, he's not getting away with it. There are more than one set of rulings. A lot of them start at the lower courts, as you probably know. We've covered all this. But this is the first major ruling that goes against the defunding plans. And it is a signal that while this, as I've mentioned, is not the final step in the case, right? You start with basically the early steps, and then the White House has tried to, when they've lost, appeal that to the Supreme Court, saying, we know we're losing, but please help us. And so this morning, the Supreme Court said, no, we're not helping you get out of this early jam, and you can't just defund, at least this way. The ruling was 5-4. And so that also gives us new information in this second Trump term, because we've got these justices, including the ones he put on the court. And so what you see here against Trump on this case, right, is a working majority of 5 justices. And I'm going to leave this up for you because we could be following this for at least the next several years. This could be the coalition that sometimes says no to Trump, even though you see Barrett on there as a Trump appointee and you see Chief Justice Roberts, a Republican appointee. What you also see here is why the White House has this strategy, because they already have 4 votes for something like this, right? They narrowly lost, but they have 4 votes basically willing to go along with the rewriting of how funding and the power of the purse and congressional norms that go back 100 years. So you see those 5 going against the president. You see the 4, and we could see this coalition and this breakdown in the future. Roberts and Barrett also joined the liberal justices in that January ruling, which was a different topic. But again, if you cleave it on the line of just doing whatever Donald Trump demands or not, they said that sentencing in New York could go forward while he had those other justices siding with him. So this is a split. This is one of the battle lines that people follow. And remember, Donald Trump has pursued power in very aggressive ways that tested our system. And sometimes he lost, and sometimes the Supreme Court bailed him out. But other presidents have done this too. I'm not saying he's anything like FDR or Harry Truman. If you talk to historians and people who study this stuff, those are some of the high point presidencies for foreign policy and leading America. But there were big cases that you read about in law school about testing powers, which meant that the era of those different presidents was also tested by the era of those Supreme Courts. And we're seeing that replay now. And if everything I'm telling you sounds a little bit legal, a little bit in the weeds, I promise you I'm not just emphasizing this because I'm MSNBC's legal correspondent, because I'm a lawyer. I'm emphasizing this because when presidents test power, it is first and foremost the Supreme Court that is that block. We can debate whether members of Congress should yell more or less or hold up different paddles. People were talking about that last night. But it is always in our system of government, the Supreme Court, that matters most in quickly, before even a next election, saying no, if you've exceeded authority. So this ruling today is important. It was concise and to the point. We know about the split because there was a dissent, but the unsigned majority ruling said this effort by Trump was denied. And then it had some legalese about saying the lower court ruling, which it was leaving in place after denying Trump's application, would still have to deal with the details of how to pause or slow down these efforts to defund things that Trump doesn't like. The reason why that's a big deal is if Congress funds it, then in most cases the president can't just cancel it after the funding law is passed. Supreme Court reporter Nina Totenberg also noted that the way this was done seemed unusual. The court majority basically said, if you dot your I's and cross your T's, we've got your back. Justice Alito had that dissent, which showed the four that I showed you, the four justices who wanted to do what Trump wanted. And he argued that a single district court judge should not have unchecked power to make the government pay basically the agreements it's agreed to. And then he threw in his own little kind of personal emotion. He is stunned. I am stunned, Alito says. Now, that's a reminder of how Justice Alito and certain members of the court have really given up any pretense of just hewing to the law and saying this fits our precedent or this doesn't, because when you say you're stunned, you're just sharing your emotions based on what your preconceptions were. I guess he thought there would be at least one extra vote, and he is stunned that there's not. But for him being an important member of the Supreme Court, if any other lawyer said that, you'd go, well, that sounds like a you problem, that the events on the court aren't matching the perceptions and expectations you had, and you feel stunned. Now, the context for this is a series of lower court losses. And we've been tracking this for you as the White House and President Trump test power even more than in the first term and basically dare the courts to do something about it. And we've seen 5 blows and 1 win this week alone.
Efforts with DOJ and reshaping the federal government are designed to eventually go before the Supreme Court, and they expect that they will likely side with President Trump. It's going to be that's a long game, that's a long path, but that's how all of this has been designed. They knew these would be challenged in court. They didn't expect to win initially, but they do expect to win at the high court.
The Chief Justice John Roberts was the tiebreaker.
Exactly here, yeah. He just said, look, we're going to send this down. We're not going to keep this frozen. We're going to send this down to the district court, and they can handle it. But I think everyone expects that one of these big DOJ-related cases is likely going to come back before the Supreme Court in the coming months.
Excellent explanation, Paula Reed. Thank you very, very much.
And it is interesting on the heels because we saw President Trump briefly talking to Chief Justice Roberts last night.
He said thank you to him.
He said thank you, I'll never forget it. We don't know what he was talking about, but it's just such a fascinating dynamic.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you so much. I want to continue this discussion with CNN senior legal analyst Ellie Honig. So how are you viewing this, Ellie?
Well, Pam, I think this is a substantial setback for the Trump administration. Now, the winning side here, the challengers, they had argued in the lower courts that essentially the president has no power to block this federal funding because Congress had already allocated it. And under Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress has the power to tax and spend. That was ultimately the argument that prevailed here. Now, the other side of it, the Trump administration and the dissenters in this case argue, first of all, the district court judge had no power to do what he did, that he overstepped. Second of all, that the way this case was brought by private businesses was procedurally improper. And third, the dissenting conservative justices argue what we, the Supreme Court, should have done is put this whole thing on hold so that we could have the full rounds of briefing and argument that we'd ordinarily have. And as the dissent correctly notes, the practical impact of this is that $2 billion is almost certainly going to get out the door and nobody can stop it at this point.
When can that happen? That's what I'm trying to get at, just sort of the direct impact from this. Yep. Yes, they're sending it back to the lower court, but what does it mean for that aid that's frozen right now?
So, as Paula said, the Supreme Court has now sent this case back to the district court, the trial level court. And this is the same judge who previously ordered the federal government, you cannot block this, you need to get it out the door. He gave him something like 36 hours to get it out the door. Well, now the Supreme Court has said back to the district court, yes, district court judge, you do have jurisdiction and authority to order that this money be paid, and you need to work with the parties to get this money out the door in a way that's quick, but also feasible, not impossible from a technical point of view.
So what does this tell us about pending disputes about federal funding, international funding with USAID, and also within the U.S. domestic funding?
Yeah, this is why I think this case is so important, because we need to get ready. We're going to see a whole series of these lawsuits about DOJ, the firings, the withholding of federal funding. They are making their way through the federal courts as we speak. And this is one of the first two, really, to reach the Supreme Court. In general, this is a conservative Supreme Court. In general, this court is going to side with broad conceptions of executive power, of presidential power. However, I think one big exception we need to watch for, and we see it in this case, is when it comes to federal funding, because these justices are conservative, but they can read the Constitution. And again, Article 1, the very first enumerated power is given to Congress. So if Congress has decided to spend money, I think under a strict reading of the Constitution, then the president cannot block it. So watch for that pattern, I think, to repeat itself in the coming weeks and months, generally siding with the president, but not necessarily on these issues of withholding federal funding.
What is the significance, in your view, of how the justices split in this ruling?
Yeah, so a really interesting breakdown here. We had the Chief Justice and Justice Amy Coney Barrett siding with the three liberals to give a 5-4 majority. And again, I think when we look forward, you're basically going to have the three liberal justices, Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan. They're generally going to be locked in against broad executive power, against the Trump administration. It's a safe bet moving forward to count on elite justices Alito and Thomas and Gorsuch basically being in favor of executive power. And so that leaves us really three justices in the middle, the Chief Justice, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, who are going to serve more or less as the middle, the swing. Now, we know they're conservatives, but as you see in this case, if the liberals can win over two of those three, then they can actually pull out a decision here and there.
All right, Ali Honig, as always, thank you so much.
So, folks, here's my interpretation, but Trump is furious at the Supreme Court, at all 9 of them, over his losses that have happened and are going to continue to happen, these surprise defeats. Because here's the thing. We know Trump's irrational. And I can tell you, he's the exact sort of guy. Now, this is speculation on my part, to be fair. That he's the exact sort of guy, though, we know this to be a fact. That will blame everyone for his failures, even people that support him. Like, I can't imagine, like, being in the White House and you back Trump 100%, and then his plan fails, and then because you're the person in the room, he blames you, because you're the guy bringing him the Diet Coke that day or whatever, right? You know, like, that's what we're talking about here. And I can almost see him obviously being furious at Amy Coney Barrett, but even at his more aligned judges, because how dare they not just vote for him on Supreme Court issues, but how dare they not convince the other judges to do the same? How dare Clarence Thomas not only vote for Trump, but how dare he not, force or whatever he can do to get Roberts and Coney Barrett and even the three liberals to vote for him? How dare he not accomplish that? This is the broken dictatorial mind of Trump. If you're a Trump supporter and you think to yourself, at least he'll never turn on me, you are a fool.